Hey guys, it's been a little while. Let's have a look to another double game week for game week 25. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast, website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another game week preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and some general Premier League chat ahead of game week 25, double game week 25. So due to Liverpool advancing into the League Cup final, this fixture between Liverpool and Villa has been brought forward, which means both of those teams will subsequently then blank in a few weeks in game 29, which is probably a little bit too far away to worry about right now. Newcastle, of course, the other team that made it to the final, their fixture against Crystal Palace will also likely blank in 29 and will probably go further out into game week 33. From that point on, the doubles and blanks really start to kick off, but we can worry about that when we get there. So it's obviously been about 2 weeks since we've last had to worry about our draft teams. We've had a weekend of FA Cup fixtures. Feels like there's been a huge amount of football since we've last had to worry about the Premier League. There were those League Cup semi-final second legs. You've had lots of European football. It feels like we've really seen a lot of these guys, but none of it has really been to worry about our draft teams. We did have the Merseyside derby that was rearranged last night. That was a good game. A little bit of fallout from that means it affects the predicted lineups and things which have already been updated. So do check those out today, because obviously I'm doing this very, very last minute. I'm recording this bright, and you can probably see by a kind of bag still under my eyes. I'm recording this about 8 o'clock in the morning. So I've only been up about an hour, and I've spent most of that fiddling around with my notes for this. It's been a very busy week, but I wanted to try and squeeze something out before the waiver deadline, which for those of you can see on screen is this evening, 6:30 UK time, Thursday the 13th of February. That's because we've got a Friday night game tomorrow, which means the main game week deadline will be tomorrow at 18:30, Friday the 14th on Valentine's Day. As always, if you do enjoy our stuff, if this is the first time you've maybe stumbled across the Draft FC channel or podcast, then give us a thumbs up and make sure you click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes as they drop. There are lots of new players to discuss as well, because this is the other one. This is the first episode back since the January transfer window shut. Also some more familiar names who got moves too. Given that I know where the vast majority of the questions are going to end up, at the end, I'll do a bit of a preference list of some of the usual suspects being bandied around this week. So, if you're then going to comment, should I pick up Rashford or should I pick up Asensio? Have a look at the list. Whichever one is above the other one is the one I prefer. And I'll do a quick rundown of that. Recording this episode Thursday, 13th of Feb. So any team news, injury developments or press conference info are up to date as of then. And of course, subject to change. Some of the players I'll be discussing in this episode include all of the new guys that came through at the end of the transfer window, plus a couple of other more familiar names. Let's get straight into it. So usually I would kick things off with Waiver Watch in the interest of just saving about 30 seconds. I'm not going to discuss them. For those watching on the YouTube channel, I'll flash them up on screen now so that you can pause if you really want to have a look. But straight into some key injuries, suspensions, departures. There were loads I could have put on here. The main two who have really emerged since the last episode are a couple of the Arsenal attackers in Martinelli and Kai Havertz, both with hamstring injuries. Havertz, his injury sounds to be far worse than Martinelli's. We're waiting for firm detail at the moment, but Havertz's injury sounds to be more in the bracket of Saka's, but obviously we're into February now, so on a similar trajectory to Saka could well mean that we don't see him again this season, which is a shame for him and means that Arsenal are, of course, now without Havertz, Martinelli, Saka and Gabriel Jesus, which obviously opens the door to some of the more fringe players who we'll be discussing later on in this episode. John Duran, of course, finally got confirmed of his move away to Al Nassr, which, of course, opens the door for some more Villa assets, and right on the verge, right on the eve of a unexpected double game week for Aston Villa. So I'm sure lots of us will be looking at those guys. And then just another one to add from last night. And Dai came off with a knee injury in the first half, couldn't carry on. Again, no real firm news of how severe that is, but it's another forward option down the drain at the moment. And I know there'll be many of you now without even a single fit and healthy striker. So let's have a look through some of the January moves, starting with defenders. And apparently the defender had to have a name that began with D in order to get a last-minute move. Disasi we know about. He's gone over on loan from Chelsea to Villa. And boy, do Villa need a defender at the moment. So a last-minute loan should go straight into the starting 11 at the weekend for those upcoming games in the double. I believe he couldn't go into the team at the weekend for the FA Cup because he was cup tied. But I expect him to go straight into the Premier League 11 this weekend and should play both in the double. Next is Nasa Giga, came from Red Star Belgrade to Wolverhampton. He's 22-year-old Burkinabe centre-back, has Champions League experience this season and last with his former club, getting a goal and an assist from those games so far. Another defensive option for their very patchy, injury-ridden backline, and given how poor they've been this season, would not be surprised if they end up with a completely new look back three. And I think at the moment, if I recall, my predicted lineup has him going straight in there. Next is Ben Chilwell, a player that we are, again, very familiar with, who has struggled with injuries in recent seasons. We haven't seen him feature in the Premier League at all this year for Chelsea because he was basically frozen out in the summer. We have seen him a little bit in the Cups. Obviously gives Palace some much-needed cover at left wing-back because essentially it was just Mitchell or otherwise they were having to pull someone else across there. Thankfully, Mitchell has been very, very durable. He's hardly missed a minute. I'm not interested in this move. I think this is purely there for cover. Purely lets Mitchell have a bit of a rest if he needs to. Yeah, I don't see Chilwell unseating him. Maybe if there was a double game week, they might give Chilwell one of the games. But overall, I'm still fairly comfortable. If you were holding Mitchell this week, for example, going in against Everton, I would be fairly happy to hold. Danso is another new defender, gone from Lens to Spurs, stolen from the jaws of Wolves last minute after Dragzin has unfortunately checked out until next year with an ACL, probably another one I should have put on the injury list there. Spurs needed a centre-back and they got one. He's not going to set the world alight, but he will play because there is literally nobody else left. We've already seen a little bit of him. He looks like a safe pair of hands there. As I said, he's not going to unseat the main two guys long term, but if you really wanted a bit of Spurs defence, I have no idea why you would do. He's probably your most assured and easiest way in, but not one I'm bothered about whatsoever. And then finally, Dorgu. Patrick Dorgu, gone from Lecce to Man United, 20-year-old Danish left-back / left wing-back, can also play the other side. In fact, I think he played the other side. I missed the United game the other day in the Cup. I think he may have played on the right. Will be coming in really as a long-term backup solution or a long-term alternative solution to that left wing-back spot, which has been a bit of a needs-must since Shaw's perpetual injury situation. You know, we've seen Dallo over there. We've seen a bit of Mazraoui. Malaysia obviously was playing there now and again. But yeah, I would expect him to nail down that left wing spot. Sounds very promising. Got a bit of an eye for an attacking return, as you can see from his numbers there. Non-penalty, expecting goal involvements per 90 of 0.23, which probably eclipses some of the United midfielders at the moment, I dare say. Martinez was the other one I could have obviously put on the injury list with an ACL injury from a couple of weeks ago. And so, yeah, it means there are just one other less body there, which means the likes of Mazraoui or Dallo may have to fill in a little bit in the back three, which of course opens the door for someone like Dorgu to get one of those wing-back positions more regularly. Into the midfielders, again, not an exhaustive list. Wolves signed Marshall Minetzi from Rennes. He's predominantly a defensive central midfielder. Got a little bit of an eye for goal. You can see there this season his non-penalty expected goal involvements for 90. 0.39, but not one I'm interested in for draft at the moment. Another one that falls into that category is Carlos Alcaraz, who Everton have signed permanently, I believe, from Flamengo. We've seen him before at Southampton. Possible long-term replacement being eyed for Abdoulaye Doucouré, whose contract is up in June, I think. So may well play this weekend due to injuries and the suspensions they've now got, but not one I am bothered about at the moment. Then we've got Matthias Tell, who's joined on loan from Bayern Munich to Spurs. No clue from the reports where the obligation or option to buy kind of sits. It sounds like it's more of an option, with both parties needing to be sort of keen to make the move permanent if they want to in the summer. Stats for him are heavily skewed by a lack of minutes to date, and especially this season. Last season, he made 30 appearances in the Bundesliga, almost exclusively off the bench. He was averaging about half an hour per appearance, and he got 12 attacking returns in that time, which is just over one goal involvement every 90 minutes, which is very good output. But it's obviously a very different proposition when you are mopping up at the end of a 5-0 win for Bayern Munich, compared to starting games in this current iteration of a Tottenham Hotspur team. The early signs are promising, and of course, under trying circumstances, he is off the mark already with a late consolation goal against Villa at the weekend. Solanke and Richarlison are still out injured, and I would be very surprised if he does not line up as the Spurs number 9 for the weekend game against Man United. He'll be very keen to continue to prove himself. He looks like he's got a bit about him. And again, with many in this episode, quite a low risk, high reward if he hits the ground running and you're able to grab him in the waivers. He will be a first sweep waiver pickup for somebody, but there'll be lots of variation in the waiver order this weekend. It's going to be really interesting, actually, to see where some of the ownership levels go for these guys. Because you could see he goes as early as the first overall waiver pick for the guy bottom of the league. He could even fall up 5 or 6, 7 places, depending on who the others favour. So, an interesting one. And as I said, I'll go through my preference board at the end. Next is Nico Gonzalez, who's joined Manchester City from Porto. Excellent pass through the ball. Definitely not a like-for-like Rodri replacement, if that even exists. He's a proper sort of box-to-box, all-action midfielder. Most of his minutes this season have come as a defensive midfielder, but to think of him in this way would mean that you potentially overlook a draft asset that has potential. So for the remainder of the season, I would expect him to start the majority of games when fit. That will likely be, I would guess, a double pivot alongside the likes of Bernardo Silva or Kovacic, or even Rico Lewis at times. I like the idea of picking him up now in moderately sized draft leagues. We've seen Pep isn't afraid to start these new guys straight away in the Premier League, and he adds something that they've been missing with Rodri out, and may well chip in with some useful goals over the next few months. Anyone that picked up some rogue Everton mids for the double game week will likely have a midfield spot for some of these guys ready to move, and so you could do a lot worse than punting on Gonzalez, but as you'll see later on, wouldn't be in my top bracket of potential pickups for this game week. Then we've got a couple of the Villa guys, one new, one we are very familiar with. Let's start with the more familiar one, which is Marcus Rashford. Ownership currently sits around 40% in 10-team leagues, so that means he's there for the majority. And as I said, we're now on the cusp of a double game week that starts off with a home game against Ipswich. So injuries, particularly to Ollie Watkins, means that he should feature, though it's not totally assured that he'll start the game as he's competing with Ramsey on the left side. But we'd still get minutes off the bench, almost certainly. It would likely start at least one of the two games in the double. I think as bad as he's been for United, it's still a new start with huge potential upside and another fairly low risk, high reward pickup if he's kicking around your waiver pile, which for many of you, as I said, he will be. And the name still carries a lot of trade value. So if you were to pick him up and he did hit the ground running, but you still weren't sure and wanted to move him on, you'd almost certainly be able to get a decent upgrade in a trade with a fellow United fan in your draft league. And then the last one is a Galactico to bolster the Aston Villa squad. Asensio joins from PSG on loan currently. I mean, the Villa squad was starting to look a little bit threadbare, 1 or 2 injuries, and suddenly they're really scrabbling around for a starting 11. Similar to Rashford, we saw quite a promising cameo against Spurs in the FA Cup at the weekend, and is another one that could be a really fun prospect for the double game week coming up, but I don't think his minutes are going to be quite as likely as Rashford's are. He's always has been a very steady provider of attacking returns throughout his career, with a fairly even split of goals and assists. He could be a very useful player and may well settle into a starting spot on the right, depending on who settles better out of him and Marlon. I just think Marlon is a little bit more durable and I'd be very surprised if we see Asensio play a full 90 minutes at any stage this season for Villa. And similarly to Tel, we've seen Asensio over the years mostly as a backup in teams like Real Madrid, PSG, and so it's very easy to come on and get some stat padding attacking returns when your team's already 3 or 4 nil up, coming on in the 60th minute to give some other guys a rest, versus having to grind out results and potentially start games for a team like Villa, who are real scrappers. I like the idea of Asensio being a nice, classy, technical relief to bring on deep into the second half. I'm sure he will start games, but, he's the type of player, if you're the opposition and you've been run a bit ragged for 60, 70 minutes, and then Asensio gets brought on and just starts flicking it and the ball sticking to him, can just be a real nightmare. So, yeah, I like the move overall for Villa. Just remains to be seen whether he's on the pitch quite enough for him to outshine, say, the likes of Rashford and Marlon for draft potential. And then finally, Evan Ferguson got a move on loan from Brighton to West Ham. Seems like the most obvious move in the world as he rejoins Graham Potter. Touted as the next Harry Kane just a couple of years ago. The promise has obviously stalled very much since then. And, maybe a change of scene will do him good. West Ham are desperate for a goal scorer. And with Bowen's return from injury, there should be a good supporting cast around him to help him get some goals. Given the lack of forward options and injuries, it's really impossible not to advocate for picking him up. If you're currently sat with 3 healthy starting striker options, then you are definitely going to be in the minority and in a very envied position. For the majority of us, including myself, we'll have at least one streaming forward or one injured forward who's going to be out for a little while. And I think picking up Ferguson is a no-brainer. The real question, again, this will be a very, very individualised question. So I'm preempting questions like, should I pick up Ferguson or Rashford? Obviously, 2 positional differences there. Really comes down to your team. If you've got no starting fit strikers, then Ferguson becomes a priority because you need one. If you've already got 1 or 2, then Ferguson would not really interest me at all over the likes of some of these midfielders that we've just been talking about. So, we can obviously easily discuss the mids versus other midfielders in a like for like, but when it comes to Ferguson, he's a move that I'm sure lots of people will have somewhere in their waiver priority list. Someone will likely out-prioritise him if you don't put him first, but I don't think he's going to go and score 10 goals between now and game week 38, so we can clip that at the end when he does. But that's going to be a very individual decision. So, in some main picks for defenders, we've already talked about him. The main one, and I could have listed him in hidden gem territory, probably should have done, is Dazarsi with that double game week for Villa, with the first one against Ipswich. High chance of a clean sheet, or as good a chance of a clean sheet as you're going to get, and at a minimum probably getting 4 points, even if they do concede in both games. Into the midfielders, Dango Utara, of course. I'm just never deleting off the list, and I'll just continue to fiddle with his roster percentage as it gradually creeps up. Trip to Southampton this week, the Bournemouth guys have to be on the radar. I know that their ownership has absolutely surged over the last few weeks. Even Tavernier last week has got out of hidden gem territory already, and he only came off the bench for 20 minutes, I think. Started their FA Cup game. Still a bit of doubt over whether he'll start or Brooks will start in the Premier League. I still think with their current fit players, Tavernier probably is better than Brooks. But we'll wait and see. I think any of them are still very much worth eyeing up if they were available. Marlon, we've obviously touched on a lot already with talking about the Villa guys in general. Still plenty of availability. In 10-team leagues, ownership just 27% currently. I would expect Marlon to start up front. That's where I've got him penciled in my predicted lineup. So even if we accept that he starts up front against Ipswich and maybe comes off the bench against Liverpool, I think he might start both though. Very, very good chance of points, and another very low risk, high reward pickup for the double, even if you're not really sure on keeping him longer term. Now, as I was prepping last night, report hot off the press was that Nico Jackson is likely going to be out for a couple of months, which potentially leaves Christopher Nkunku as the most obvious backup option as their starting striker. He started the weekend in their FA Cup game against Brighton. The only way this backfires is if Maresca goes for some sort of false 9 system, but I think when you've got a player like Nkunku as your backup, I really don't know why you would do that, because he's class. The minutes haven't flowed in the Premier League this season, but from what he has averaged, 1.2 expected goal involvements per 90 on a career average of 0.72, very, very good form. And as I said, a player that is settled in their team, not someone that's just turned up 2 weeks ago. Chelsea have some cracking fixtures over the next month or two, including home games against Southampton and Leicester. And while others may be attracted to the new players like Tell, Asensio, Gonzalez, etc., as you'll see in a few slides' time, I would much rather take Nkunku. Ramsey is the other one for a very honourable mention for the double game week. As I said, with Rashford, I'm not convinced he starts both games, and it could be that Rashford ends up unseating him a little bit as the weeks go on now. I know there are lots of Ramsey fans out there. I know Villa fans rate him. I know draft managers generally like Ramsey. I've said it before, he's never been one that I've been that enamoured with, to be honest. But, 19% ownership, double game week, likely to get a start and a bench appearance, if you had to guess now. So I'm sure his ownership will rocket, and rightly so. Then we have got the Arsenal pairing of Nwaneri and Sterling. So as I said, with the injury to Kai Havertz, it means Arsenal are now without Saka, Martinelli, Jesus, and of course Kai Havertz for the foreseeable future. It means we are very likely to see both Nwaneri and Sterling starting Premier League games as the weeks roll on. They've got Leicester away this weekend, and then West Ham at home is a very good pair of fixtures. And despite all the stats telling me that Nwaneri is the one to go for based on this season's output, nobody would be shocked if Sterling ended up as a big performer from these two games. So definitely both options to consider on the list, but the numbers would say that Nwaneri is the one if you do want a piece of the Arsenal attack. I've seen some comments out there just generally doubting whether or not you'd want any piece of the Arsenal attack given all of those missing, but I still think there's a good enough base and a good enough structure there, and with Trossard also in the attack, they can still very much go and demolish Leicester even with that team. Into hidden gems, not many really to shout about. Chris Richards for Palace at home against Everton. Everton now probably without Ndiaye. Also, Decore suspended as he got sent off after the final whistle. So Palace are as good a chance of a clean sheet of any, and could be quite overlooked with some of the double options out there. If you've got any other Palace defenders as well, then I would hold for this game week. And then into hidden gem midfielders, John McGinn for a double against Ipswich and Liverpool. Definitely worth a punt, especially if you're in the bigger leagues. Non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90 of 0.3, which means over the two should accumulate about 0.6, which means he's just about odds on to come away with something across the two fixtures. The other one is Lucas Bergvall. I do expect him to start against Man United. Very low ownership. No returns in the Premier League so far. He's got a bit of a history with Man United. He was on their books for a little while as an under-18, I think, but they didn't end up signing him. So would probably love to have a big game at home against Man United. And again, just one for those larger 14, 15, 16 team leagues to consider if you wanted a piece of that. Most hidden gem pick this week is a pretty boring one and quite risky one, which is Andreas Garcia. Just 8%, well, I say just 8% rostered in 16 team leagues is quite high. Just 45 Premier League minutes so far. Brand new young right back who signed earlier on in the window. Just an option if you think he's going to start both games in the double game week. I'm not convinced he will. There are options. They could put Disasi, Kamara in at centre back. Bogard could be chipping around somewhere. I don't really know how they're going to line up, but with Konsa missing and Cash missing, they're going to have to be somewhat creative, but yeah, I might do a final pass of my predicted lineups this afternoon, and I'm pretty 50-50 on whether Andreas Garcia is in there, so I could flip him in at any minute. But yeah, certainly for the big leagues, very, very high reward potential if you did pick him up and he did play the double. So my waiver preference list. Now I'm looking at this very short term. I'm looking at this for sort of the next 2 or 3 game weeks. As I said, Nkunku is at the top for me. I like Marlon. He's going to start up front, I think, against Ipswich, and has, I think, more potential to get a run in the Villa team and start games. Then Rashford, just because of his ceiling, what we've seen him do in years gone by. And again, I think he could nail down a left wing spot for Villa too. Then Tell, going to be playing out of position, similar to Marlon as a midfielder playing as a number 9. Then Ramsey and Asensio, I've got very similarly. Nwaneri, Ferguson, if you were really unsure, I've got down there. Luca Digne would definitely be on the list if he was available, but his ownership is really high in 10-team leagues. And then just bringing up the bottom there is Gonzalez for Manchester City. As I said, predicted lineups are done, so you can go and check those out at draftfc.co.uk. So that is it for this episode. Another reminder, the Game Week waiver deadline will be at 6:30 this evening UK time, Thursday the 13th, with the Game Week deadline 24 hours later tomorrow on Friday evening. If you enjoy the content, make sure you like and subscribe. If you're listening to the audio, do follow whichever podcast platform you're listening to. Check out draftfc.co.uk if you are a keen draft manager and haven't gone over there. Have a look at what we've got on offer, and you may want to consider signing up to get some stats, facts, figures, and metrics that you won't find anywhere else in the draft universe. You also get your global rank. As the season's starting to draw to its end now, you're able to see where your draft league pitches against every other similarly sized draft league in the world. Again, a thing you won't be able to find anywhere else if you do like some of the ranking that you get from the normal FPL game. So this is probably the latest I have ever recorded and published an episode, with the deadline just hours away. So I will forgive you if you don't manage to listen to this or watch this before the Game Week deadline. But for those of you that do, best of luck. Get all of these guys penciled in on the waivers. Don't assume that you're not going to get some of these, because if you look at that list that I just put on the preference list, there are a lot of good names floating around for this weekend. Could be a potentially big sliding doors moment, so do not forget to do your waivers. Many will, because of the slightly unusual deadline. Obviously, we don't get too many Friday night football matches, so could be a big weekend in the season with still plenty of game weeks and plenty of points on offer. So best of luck for that, and as always, stay sure.